That day, I signed my name on the divorce papers my husband had prepared in advance and thrown in my face. His expression could not have been more ruthless. I clearly saw the glee and contempt in the eyes of Blake Caldwell, the man I had shared my bed with for the last 10 years. He surely thought he had finally, successfully rid himself of an old, parasitic housewife, and he must have been overflowing with excitement at the thought of bringing home, with full honors, his young and beautiful mistress, pregnant with his precious heir, dreaming of a promising new beginning. He even had the audacity to offer me a multi-million-dollar settlement, a sum in the high seven figures to, as he put it, demonstrate the generosity of a successful CEO and to buy my silence. But he was wrong. Utterly and completely wrong. The moment I walked out of the cold courthouse doors, before his smug smile had even faded, my first action wasn't to break down in tears or call my family to complain. I calmly got into the waiting car, pulled out my secure phone, and dialed a number saved under the most common of names. Plumber. On the other end of the line, a polite and professional voice answered immediately. Madam Chairwoman, do you have any instructions? Looking at the crowd rushing past the window, I said in a voice that was serene yet as cold as ice, execute Plan B immediately. Freeze the entire $220 million portfolio and ensure no transaction is carried out without my direct order. At that very moment, in the most luxurious real estate showroom in New York City, Blake Caldwell had his arm around the shoulders of his mistress, Brooke Ashton, pointing to the model of a penthouse apartment. He was about to make the down payment on the most lavish gift possible for his new wife-to-be and the precious child she was carrying. He had no idea that just minutes later, his almighty black card would be mercilessly declined, and that the entire empire he was so proud of, the immense fortune he believed he held in his hands, would vanish like smoke in an instant. He would crumble when the bank representative told him the incredible truth, the truth that would send him plummeting from the pinnacle of honor to the deepest pit of humiliation. My name is Catherine Sterling, and I am 35 years old. In the eyes of everyone, including my in-laws, I was a woman of enviable luck, fortunate to have married the young, talented, and handsome CEO of a major corporation, Blake Caldwell, becoming a modern-day Cinderella. I was lucky to live in a luxury mansion, free of financial worries, playing the role of a housewife who cared for her husband, went to the spa, and dedicated her time to shopping. For 10 years, they believed in that perfect facade. They forgot who I was a decade ago, or perhaps they never wanted to know. As the luxury sedan left the courthouse grounds, leaving behind the figure of a victorious Blake Caldwell, I didn't look back. There was no regret in my heart, only a terrifying coldness. I watched my reflection in the car window, a woman in her mid-30s, wearing a simple silk dress and light makeup, an appearance that wouldn't turn heads. When I met Blake, he was a recent college graduate, and his family's business was nothing more than a small construction firm on the verge of bankruptcy. But I didn't see any of that back then. I saw in him the flame of ambition and the desire to revive his father's business. And with the love and innocence of youth, I decided to be the one to give his ambition wings. I gave up everything. I resigned from a promising career at a top investment bank in Chicago to follow him to New York. The early days were incredibly difficult. We lived in his family's modest suburban house. The company was drowning in debt, and almost all the employees had left. My father-in-law, Walter Caldwell, was bedridden from the shock of the business failure, and my mother-in-law, Genevieve Caldwell, spent her days sighing and blaming her incompetent son. In the midst of this desperate situation, instead of frustration, I felt a strange excitement. For a financial expert like me, a company on the brink of collapse was like a complex mathematical problem, a stimulating challenge. I didn't act immediately. I knew that with the old-fashioned, traditional mindset of my in-laws, they would never accept a woman, let alone a new daughter-in-law, meddling in business affairs. I decided to be a clever wife. I cooked every day and cared for my sick father-in-law. But every night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I would sit with Blake at his desk. I asked him to bring me all the company's ledgers, all the contracts, all the debt documents. And in that small, dimly lit room, I began my work as a corporate restructuring specialist. I spent sleepless nights analyzing every figure, finding loopholes in management and unnecessary expenses. I mapped out a detailed plan for Blake, down to the last millimeter. First, cut unnecessary staff and streamline the organization. Second, negotiate with creditors to extend payment deadlines and present a reasonable repayment roadmap. Third, and most importantly, find a new direction for the company. I realized we could never compete if we continued with standard residential construction. I proposed a bold shift towards developing smart homes and using eco-friendly building materials, a very new field in the US at the time. At first, Blake was very hesitant. He was afraid of the risk. But I used all my knowledge and market analysis to convince him. I showed him the enormous potential of this market and painted a promising future. And to secure capital, I didn't hesitate to secretly inject a considerable portion of my own inheritance into the company under the guise of an anonymous investor. It was all done through complex transactions so that no one would notice. Blake only knew that a benefactor had seen the company's potential and decided to invest. My plan succeeded beyond imagination. The new direction miraculously resurrected the company. Our smart home projects created a sensation in the market. Major contracts started pouring in. From a workshop on the verge of bankruptcy, my in-laws' company gradually recovered, began to turn a profit, and grew at a breathtaking pace. Throughout this process, I was always in the shadows. All the important strategies and decisions from which projects to invest in, which companies to acquire, to when to issue stock came from my hand. I drafted every plan and every speech for Blake. His only role was to memorize them and present himself to the public with the confident demeanor of a competent CEO. He was the face. I was the brain. He was the actor on stage, I was the director behind the curtain. I was content with that role. I needed neither honor nor power. It was enough for me to see the man I loved succeed and my family happy. I naively thought he would understand and value my silent sacrifice. I didn't realize that when a man tastes success too easily, he immerses himself in an illusion. He would forget who provided it all and start to think he deserved something better and newer than a housewife. For 10 years, living as a shadow, I helped him build an empire. But in those 10 years, without realizing it, I created a monster of delusion and betrayal. And in the end, that monster came back to devour all my love and happiness. You might be wondering how I came to have such immense power. How could I freeze the assets of an entire group with a single phone call? Was it simply because I strategized and advised from the shadows? No, dear viewers. If that were the case, Blake could have easily pushed me out of the game as soon as he had a change of heart. My real power comes from a secret from an immense promise made almost 10 years ago. A promise with the only person in my husband's family who saw my true worth. That person was my father-in-law, Mr. Walter Caldwell. When I married into the family, Mr. Caldwell was going through the most frustrating time of his life. The business he had dedicated his entire existence to was facing bankruptcy, which had made him ill. While I cared for him in the hospital, I didn't just fulfill my duty as a daughter-in-law. I treated him like my own father. We spent many hours talking, opening our hearts to each other. He was an intelligent and perceptive man, seasoned by 1,000 battles. Even bedridden, he never stopped worrying about the company's future. And it was in those conversations that he quickly realized something. This girl from a modest background, whom his wife had always looked down upon, possessed an extraordinary mind for management and finance. He was astonished when I accurately pointed out the flaws in his past management strategies and proposed new ideas that were bold yet logical. At the same time, he realized another painful truth. His only son, Blake, though he had a polished appearance and ambition, lacked the determination, sharpness, and coldness necessary in a leader. He knew that if he left the entire business to Blake, it wouldn't be long before it collapsed again. He agonized, thought long and hard, and one afternoon, when we were alone in the hospital room, he made what was probably the most important decision of his life. "Daughter," he called me. His voice was weak, but his gaze was extremely lucid. "I have to ask you a favor, a very important one, and I want to entrust it to you. Can you promise me that no matter what happens, you will never abandon Blake or this family's business?" At that moment, filled with a burning love for Blake, I nodded without hesitation. "Yes, Dad. I promise." "Good," he sighed in relief. "Then listen to me carefully. I know I don't have much time left, but I can't close my eyes while my life's work is about to vanish like smoke. I know my son Blake's character. He's a good kid, but he's not leadership material. He trusts people too easily and gets carried away by emotions. But you," he looked me straight in the eye, "you have the mind of a shark. You are cold, decisive, and you see through people. You are the one who can steer this ship." And then he revealed a monumental plan to me. He had his personal lawyer secretly draft a will, more accurately, a trust agreement that delegated the management and ownership of all his assets. According to that agreement, upon his death, all his shares, representing 80% of the company's capital, would not be inherited by Blake or his mother but would be transferred to an offshore investment trust. And the only person designated to manage that trust and exercise all rights was me, Catherine Sterling. "I'm doing this," he explained, "not because I don't trust my son, but because I love him too much. I don't want him to carry such a heavy burden. You will be the brain in the shadows, the one who makes the life or death decisions. And Blake will be the public face, the representative. He will continue to enjoy all the glory and wealth as a CEO with a generous salary and bonuses. But the real power must be in your hands. Only then can this company survive and prosper. That promise also included very strict clauses for me. I had the responsibility to continue growing the company. I couldn't sell or weaken it. I was also responsible for taking care of Blake and his mother, ensuring them a comfortable life. And most importantly, this secret had to be kept until I felt it was necessary to reveal it. It was a heavy burden, but at the same time, it was the absolute trust my father-in-law placed in me. The day my father-in-law passed away, I promised before his portrait that I would do as he had entrusted me. And for the last 10 years, I did just that. I silently ran the company, turning a near-bankrupt construction firm into a $220 million empire. I gave Blake a brilliant career and my mother-in-law a life of luxury. I fulfilled my responsibility. But perhaps my father-in-law, despite his intelligence, did not foresee one thing. That when a man obtains power and honor too easily, it breeds delusion and betrayal. And that when his most trusted daughter-in-law is cornered, she will no longer remain a silent shadow. She will use the very power he gave her to claim justice for herself. My late father-in-law's secret will was not just a delegation, it was a sword. And now, the time had come to draw it. With the secret will and the absolute power entrusted to me by my late father-in-law, I dedicated myself to rebuilding and expanding the Caldwell family's business empire. But I did it in an extremely subtle and silent manner, like a puppeteer who, from behind a thick velvet curtain, skillfully manipulates every string to create a perfect play. No one, not even my husband Blake, who was by my side, nor my mother-in-law, Genevieve, who lived in the same house, realized my true role. They only saw the miraculous results and the dazzling success, but they were completely oblivious to the fact that the person creating all those miracles was precisely the housewife daughter-in-law they had always looked down upon. My office was not a glamorous suite with a shiny nameplate in a skyscraper. It was a small room in the attic of our mansion, which I had cleverly disguised as a reading and relaxation space. Inside, besides oak bookshelves filled with classic literature, there was a state-of-the-art supercomputer system, multiple monitors displaying complex stock market indices, and a separate high-speed satellite internet line to ensure a seamless 24/7 connection. That was my command center, my supreme headquarters. From there, I tracked every minute fluctuation in the global financial markets. From there, with a single click, I issued orders to buy and sell stocks and bonds worth tens of millions of dollars. And it was also from there that I planned every move and development strategy for Blake and the corporation. My manipulation was carried out in a very systematic and almost traceless way. Every morning, after preparing an elaborate breakfast for the whole family, I would spend about an hour with my husband in his ground floor study, having coffee and reading the paper together. But in reality, this was the most important strategy meeting of the day. I would pretend to casually read a hot piece of news in the Wall Street Journal about a new investment trend or an unusual move by a competitor. Playing the role of an ignorant wife, I would naively ask Blake for his opinion. "Honey, there's a lot of talk about using AI in real estate development. It sounds so complicated. Since you're the expert, what do you think? Should our company look into this field? Or, they say that other groups' stock has hit an all-time low. Since you're a management genius, do you think it would be a good time to buy, or would it be too risky?" Blake, always eager to show off and with almost zero economic knowledge, would always dismiss it arrogantly. "Oh, what do you know about business? Don't bother your pretty little head with that nonsense. I handle the company's affairs." But just a day or two later, in a high-level executive meeting, he would solemnly present those very same ideas as if they were his own strategic vision. "I've spent several nights studying this in depth," he would tell the executives in a firm voice. "I believe that investing in AI is the future. It's the path to survival for our group." The subordinate executives, who were the best financial experts I had personally hired and placed, would immediately applaud, praising the young CEO's wisdom, genius, and foresight. Every important speech Blake gave to the board of directors, every interview on TV or with the press, was written by me. I meticulously studied his speech patterns, his vocabulary, even his verbal tics, to write speeches that sounded grand and profound but seemed to come from his own mind. His only job was to memorize them like a parrot and act confident and charismatic in front of the cameras. Gradually, perhaps from so much acting, he too began to believe that those ideas and words were truly his. He became completely immersed in the illusion of his own talent and greatness, never knowing he was just a puppet skillfully handled by his simple housewife of a wife. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law, Genevieve, was the perfect catalyst and the most fervent fan of her son's illusion. She knew nothing about management or finance, she only saw the superficial results. The company grew daily, money flowed like water, and her son became increasingly famous and praised by society. She went everywhere, from neighborhood association meetings to lavish high society luncheons, bragging about the management genius her son was. "My Blake is just incredible, ladies," she would say, fanning herself with a silk fan, radiating pride. "That boy has the brain of a genius." In just a few years, he turned the bankrupt company his father left him into a massive corporation. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. He's a blessing to the family. I just hope he gives me a grandchild soon to carry on the line. And whenever someone, out of curiosity, discreetly asked about my role as the daughter-in-law in this success, she would curl her lip in disdain and wave her hand dismissively. "Catherine? Oh, please. She just got lucky meeting our Blake. She spends all day at home doing nothing, living off us, just being a housewife. What use is she in the world? Well, at least she's docile and obedient, so I suppose she fulfills her role." Those words reached my ears many times through the household staff, but I remained silent. I thought that since they didn't know the truth, it wasn't worth arguing as long as the family was at peace and Blake still loved and respected me. But I was wrong. My silence, my retreat, did not bring the peace I desired. It made them look down on me even more, believing I was a useless parasite, a mere ornament in the house. And that created the conditions for another, inevitable tragedy to sprout. When a man gets everything too easily and deceives himself into thinking he achieved it all on his own, he will start to feel that his housewife wife is no longer worthy of his greatness. He will seek recognition elsewhere, in newer, younger, more beautiful women, and betrayal approaches as an inevitable consequence. When a man reaches the pinnacle of honor without breaking a sweat, when he is surrounded by false praise and adulation, he easily forgets who he is and who climbed with him from the very first step. And my husband, Blake Caldwell, was the most perfect proof of that cruel law. When the $220 million empire was firmly established under my invisible hand, when his position as CEO became unshakable, he began to feel that the shell of a faithful husband and family man was too suffocating and dull. He began to crave new adventures and conquests to prove what he mistook for virility. And she appeared as an inevitable choice, one that perfectly suited his needs at that moment. Brooke Ashton, a young model who had just entered the entertainment world with a glamorous body and a face of innocent but calculating beauty. She was hired by the group's marketing department as the face of a luxury real estate project in the Hamptons. And during their work together, her explicit and intentional admiration at social events quickly caught Blake's attention. For a man like Blake, drunk on the illusion of his own talent, the admiration of a young, beautiful, and famous woman was an irresistible drug. With me, his wife, who knew his true nature too well, who saw through all his weaknesses and incompetence, he could never feel like a king. I could love him, care for him, advise him, but I could not look at him with the eyes of an adoring fan. I knew he was just a puppet. But Brooke was different. She saw him as a god, a true management genius. At every party, she showered him with praise for his intelligence, determination, and great vision. She gave him exactly what he was missing, what I could never give him: blind, false recognition. And they flew into the flame like moths, one for vanity, the other for material greed. At first, their illicit relationship was limited to secret dates after work, sweet messages hastily deleted before coming home. But as they delved deeper into this misguided affair, and perhaps due to pressure from Brooke, Blake started to become much bolder and more reckless. He no longer tried to hide meticulously. Sudden business trips became more frequent, as did late-night arrivals, smelling of alcohol and a strange perfume. I knew everything. I sensed it all. A woman's intuition and a financial analyst's acuity clearly showed me his abnormal changes. I could have found proof in an instant if I had wanted to. One call to the group's cybersecurity team, and I would have had all his call logs, messages, and even his location in my hands. But I didn't. Why? It wasn't because I still loved him. My love for him had cooled long ago, since the day he came home, threw a business plan full of errors at me, and demanded I fix it by the next morning. My silence was not out of fear or weakness, but because my pride was too strong. I, Catherine Sterling, would never stoop to jealousy. I would never turn my marriage into a cheap drama for the world to scrutinize. I chose to watch in silence, like a shark calmly swimming alongside a sinking ship, waiting for the most opportune moment to strike. I naively hoped he would stop on his own, that he would realize who was truly important and come back. In my own way, I tried to hold on to him by showing him my value, by making the group grow even larger. But all my efforts were in vain. In his eyes, my silence was not tolerance but the weakness and helplessness of a parasitic woman. This convinced him even more that I could never leave him, that I couldn't give up this life of luxury. How could a housewife who hadn't set foot in the professional world for 10 years survive without his support? He thought. That delusion, coupled with Brooke's growing belly, pushed him to the final, most cruel and ruthless decision. He decided to abandon me to be with his mistress openly and legally. He chose to deliver the final blow on our 10th wedding anniversary, the day he thought I would be at my most vulnerable. He brought her home, openly flaunting his betrayal, and threw the divorce papers in my face along with the most hurtful and insulting words. The puppet I had created with my youth was now trying to tear down its own creator. He didn't know that in doing so, he was pressing the switch on a time bomb himself, a bomb that would blow up his empire, his future, and the illusion of his own greatness. When Blake Caldwell, the husband I had supported with my youth, brought his pregnant mistress home to publicly demand a divorce, I thought it was the height of cruelty, the final stab in my already wounded heart. But I was wrong. It was the reaction of my mother-in-law, Genevieve, whom I had served for over 10 years and provided with a life of luxury, that plunged me into the abyss of despair and ignited in me the fire of hatred and the determination to make them pay. At first, right after Blake announced the divorce, I saw a moment of surprise and confusion on Genevieve's face. But that surprise vanished in an instant. She glanced at her son and then her eyes fell on Brooke's slightly bulging belly. And like someone who has solved a difficult math problem, an irrepressible clarity and joy shone in her eyes. She didn't reprimand her son for his infidelity, nor did she show the slightest compassion for her daughter-in-law. She simply observed and assessed the situation silently, like a cunning old fox. And when the mistress, Brooke, made a significant and provocative gesture by placing a hand on her belly, Genevieve understood the situation instantly. A radiant smile, a selfish and cruel joy, bloomed on her face. Oh, my goodness. Is this real? How wonderful. My son, you're finally thinking about the family. She exclaimed, clapping her hands. Her voice was happier than when her son's company had landed a multi-million-dollar contract. She rushed, not to comfort or support her daughter-in-law, who was standing there stunned, but to get closer to Brooke. She took her hand and looked at her belly with infinite joy. My grandchild, the firstborn of our family, is here. My dear, with such good news, why didn't you say so sooner? I would have prepared you some nourishing broths. Come, sit down and rest. Moving around too much isn't good for our precious grandchild. She had Brooke sit with extreme care on the Italian designer sofa that I myself had paid for, as if she were attending to an empress. She lavished attention on her, personally pouring her water, arranging a cushion for her, and asking questions in a voice so sweet it was chilling. How many months are you? Is it a boy or a girl? Do you have morning sickness? Are you craving anything? I'll have the staff prepare it for you right now. From now on, you'll stay here. You don't have to go anywhere. The servants will take good care of you and the baby. I watched, stunned, their touching mother-in-law and future daughter-in-law act. Even though I, the legal wife and true owner of this house, was standing right there, in their eyes, I had already become invisible. No, worse than invisible. I had become an obstacle, a nuisance, an old object that needed to be removed as soon as possible to make way for the new. And she didn't make me wait long. After showing enough care and attention to her new daughter-in-law and her precious grandchild, she turned to me. This time, there was no trace of pretense on her face, only coldness, arrogance, and an uncontainable joy. Catherine, she began. My name sounded so strange and cold on her lips. At this point, you should know your place. As you can see, our Blake has found new happiness, and Brooke is carrying the bloodline of this Caldwell family. If you continue to stay here, you will only be a nuisance and bring trouble to the house. She paused and looked me up and down with a contemptuous gaze. Frankly, for these 10 years, you have lived like a queen in this house thanks to our Blake. But you just weren't destined to enjoy that fortune. What can you do? You're a barren tree. A woman who can't have children. Well, I suppose it's fate. We can't blame you. Now you should leave on your own, so they can live their lives with dignity. You're still young, you can find happiness elsewhere. In this Caldwell family, in this renowned house, there is no place for a daughter-in-law who cannot produce an heir. A daughter-in-law who cannot produce an heir. She had repeated those words countless times behind my back in conversations with friends and relatives, but this was the first time she had said it to my face in such a ruthless and insulting way. "Mom, why are you saying that to Catherine?" Blake finally intervened. But not to defend me, but simply to play his part as a compassionate man and save face. "After all, she's been by my side for 10 years. I won't let her leave empty-handed." "You be quiet," Genevieve shouted, cutting her son off. "You're so indecisive and soft. I'll handle this matter. You men stay out of it and let us women take care of it." She stood up and approached me with a threatening expression. She no longer looked like a respectable society matron but a brothel owner throwing out an aging prostitute. She pointed her finger at the enormous wooden front door. "Take your personal belongings and get out of this house right now. I'm giving you 15 minutes. From this moment on, you are no longer my daughter-in-law or part of this family. Don't make me call security. That would be much more shameful." She was kicking me out. She was kicking me out of my own house, the house that my own money had bought. Her audacity and shamelessness had reached an unbelievable level. I looked at her, and then at Blake. He stood with his head down, not refuting a single word his mother said, tacitly agreeing. I understood. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst from Genevieve. It was a play that mother and son had discussed and planned beforehand. They wanted to humiliate me in this way, to throw me out of the house in the most shameful manner to justifiably make way for that mistress. They wanted to turn me into the guilty party, the one cast out by the family, so they could easily take over this house and the entire fortune they believed belonged to Blake. The rage rising in my throat almost choked me. But I didn't scream, I didn't argue, I didn't cry. Because I knew that at that moment, any words were useless. There is no reasoning with people blinded by greed and betrayal. I looked at them one last time. I looked at them for a long time, to engrave the true faces of these ungrateful people deep in my memory, and I turned around. Yes, I would leave. But I would not leave empty-handed and humiliated. When I left, I would take everything that belonged to me, and I would also make them pay the highest price and unimaginable price for today's farce of an eviction. After successfully kicking the nuisance that was me out of the house, Blake Caldwell and his mother were completely immersed in joy and celebration. That same night, they organized a small party to celebrate the end of their bad luck and welcome the new family member. Genevieve went around the house, praising her son's decision and her future daughter-in-law's charm to the heavens. Blake, although he initially felt a twinge of guilt, soon forgot everything in Brooke's sweet embrace. He was completely convinced he had made the rightest decision of his life. He thought he had shed a boring past to move towards a brighter future. The next morning, to showcase his status as a CEO and win the heart of his pregnant mistress, Blake decided to buy Brooke a new mansion, just as he had promised. He said the current mansion, though luxurious, was imbued with vestiges of the past and wasn't suitable for the new lady of the house. He wanted a completely new place, a completely new start. He drove his luxurious Porsche with Brooke by his side, dressed in designer maternity clothes, to the most expensive new waterfront development in the city, a place where multi-million-dollar penthouses and villas were concentrated, exclusively for the super-rich. Blake had his eye on a duplex penthouse of about 5,000 square feet with a private pool and panoramic views of the city skyline. The price, of course, was astronomical. $50 million. Entering the showroom with the air of a successful businessman and a confident attitude, Blake was immediately surrounded by salespeople who treated him like a king. He wrapped his arm around Brooke's shoulders, took a walk around, and pointed his hand at the most expensive penthouse model. "We'll take this one," he said nonchalantly, as if he were buying groceries at the market. All the salespeople were impressed. Brooke was so happy she blushed. She leaned against Blake's body, her eyes filled with pride and adoration. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell, an excellent choice. To complete the procedure, you must first pay a deposit of 10% of the apartment's price, which is $5 million. Will you be paying by card or bank transfer?" "By card," Blake replied curtly. He took out of his crocodile leather wallet a powerful, no-limit black credit card for super VIP clients. He handed it to the employee with an air of pride. This was the moment he had most been waiting for, the moment to flaunt his wealth and power in front of a beauty. The employee took the card respectfully and swiped it through the machine. He typed in $5 million and then handed the terminal to Blake to enter his PIN. Blake casually punched in the usual numbers. Both he and Brooke held their breath, waiting for the beep and the printing of the receipt. But instead of the familiar beep, red text appeared on the screen. "Transaction denied. Please contact your bank." The smile froze on Blake's face. "What's wrong?" "It seems your machine has a problem." Try again, he said in a slightly irritated tone. The employee was also a bit baffled. He rebooted the machine and swiped the card again, but the result was the same. Transaction denied. At this point, not only Blake, but also Brooke began to feel that something was wrong. The expressions of the surrounding employees also began to change from admiration to slight suspicion. Impossible. Blake shouted, starting to lose his composure. This card never has problems. Call your manager. The manager quickly arrived and, after hearing the situation, politely suggested trying another way. Perhaps you could try a direct transfer through your banking app? Blake, indignant, took out his phone. He logged into the banking app where he used to see figures in the hundreds of millions dance. But today, when the screen appeared, he felt as if an electric shock ran through his entire body. All the numbers were gone. In his personal accounts, in the company accounts, in the associated investment accounts, the balance of all of them showed a single number, $0. Ling ling. What the hell is this? Blake stammered as a cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He logged out and logged back in, but the result didn't change. Below each account was a small notice in red: your account has been temporarily frozen at the request of the ultimate beneficial owner. All transactions have been invalidated. Ultimate beneficial owner? Who the hell was that? Wasn't he the CEO and the top executive of the group? Blake, what's wrong? Brooke asked worriedly, seeing the expression on her lover's face. Shut up, Blake yelled, unable to maintain his composure any longer. He stood up hastily, went to a corner, and started making calls. The first was to the group's CFO. Mr. Alvarez, what's wrong with the company's accounts? Why are they all frozen? The CFO's voice on the other end of the line sounded tired and surprised. Mr. Caldwell, I just received the notification. The freeze order came directly from the Swiss bank where our main investment trust is managed. They say it's a direct order from the chairwoman of the trust, that is, the ultimate beneficial owner. Chairwoman? What chairwoman? My father passed away. And I'm the executive. Blake shouted into the phone. I don't know either, sir. They only said that the person who gave the order is named Catherine Sterling. Catherine Sterling. That name was like a lightning bolt striking Blake's brain. He was stunned, almost dropping the phone. Impossible. How could it be her? How could a housewife, a parasite, have such immense power? There had to be a mistake. The shock at the bank was just the beginning of the nightmare, of the terrible truth he was about to face. After the initial shock at the real estate office, Blake Caldwell ran out of there like a man possessed, leaving behind a bewildered Brooke and the contemptuous stares of the salespeople. He collapsed into his Porsche, feeling the whole world spin around him. Catherine Sterling. How could it be Catherine Sterling? There had to be a terrible mistake. Had she conspired with the CFO to play a cruel joke on him? He hurriedly dialed another number, this time the head of the group's accounting department, whom he trusted implicitly. Mr. Garcia, check right now. Is there a problem with the entire group's financial system? Why have all the accounts been frozen? The head of accounting's voice on the other end was also filled with panic and fear. Mr. Caldwell, I don't understand anything either. This morning, I received an email from the top administrative system informing of a restructuring of all financial operational authority. All access permissions for you and the other executives have been revoked. The order was given by someone with the title of Chairwoman of the Board, a title I've never heard before. Chairwoman of the Board? Who is she? What's her name? Blake shouted, his heart pounding 1,000 miles an hour. Yes. The email specifies that the person holding that position is Mrs. Catherine Sterling. Again, Catherine Sterling. This time, there was no doubt. That name, next to such a powerful title, confirmed an undeniable fact. The housewife he had just abandoned somehow had absolute control over the financial life of the entire group. But how? How could a woman who only did housework have such terrifying power? Blake frantically called one executive after another, but they all gave him similar answers. They were just salaried employees, they followed orders from above, and now their supreme boss was not CEO Blake Caldwell, but Chairwoman Catherine Sterling. Overwhelmed by helplessness, panic, and anger, Blake drove home like a madman. He needed an explanation. He needed to find out the truth. When he arrived at the mansion, he saw his mother, Genevieve, cheerfully giving orders to the maid to redecorate my room for the new daughter-in-law. Mom, we have a huge problem. Blake burst in, his face pale. He told her everything, the declined card, the frozen accounts, and Catherine's sudden rise to the position of chairwoman. Upon hearing the story, Genevieve was at first stunned, incredulous. But that expression of astonishment soon turned to fury. What? That evil bitch dares to do something like this? She shrieked. By what right? She's nothing but a parasite, a woman who can't even have children. She must have pulled some dirty trick. She's colluded with those executives to steal the company from my son. Greed and ignorance prevented her from accepting the truth. In her eyes, I was still the country girl, daughter-in-law, nothing more. She couldn't believe I could be the one with the real power. No, we can't let her get away with this, she said, pacing the room. She's surely doing this to get back at us, to pressure us for more money in the settlement. We have to go find her and put her in her place. Even if we're divorced, she's still the daughter-in-law of this house, and she needs to learn not to cross the line. Her anger and the illusion of her power as a mother-in-law blinded her. She didn't realize that our positions had been completely reversed. She still thought she could lord over me and lecture me with her mother-in-law authority. Come on, take me to wherever she is right now, she ordered her son. I heard she's temporarily staying at a friend's penthouse in that diamond tower. Let's go there. I need to demand an explanation in person. I'm going to teach her a lesson. Blake was also consumed by panic and anger at that moment. He no longer had the rationality to weigh the pros and cons. He too wanted to find me, confront me, and find out the truth. He also believed this was nothing more than a dirty trick of mine and thought he could easily quash it with his strength as a man. Thus, one furious woman and one panicked man, mother and son, drove off to find me with the blind conviction that they still held the upper hand. They didn't know they were walking straight into a bigger trap, into a play that my late father-in-law and I had prepared 10 years earlier. In a state of extreme fury and confusion, mother and son drove the Porsche at full speed towards the Diamond Tower, where they believed I was temporarily staying. Genevieve, sitting in the passenger seat with a murderous expression, kept spewing unspeakable insults, calling me a snake and ungrateful. She had even hatched a plan in her head. Upon arrival, she would make a scene, cry, scream, and cause a commotion so everyone there would know about my disloyalty and betrayal, hoping that shame would force me to docilely return everything. Blake, silent, just gripped the steering wheel. He too imagined the scene where he would interrogate me and, with his husbandly authority, force me to confess my conspiracy. They were still immersed in their illusion of power, unaware that the world had completely changed. Their luxury sedan pulled up in front of the lobby of the Diamond Tower, the most opulent in the complex. They got out of the car with the confident attitude of the upper class, but that confidence vanished instantly, as if a bucket of cold water had been thrown on them. Just as they tried to enter the lobby, two tall, uniformed security guards immediately came out and blocked their path. "Excuse me, how can we help you?" one asked in a polite but firm voice. Genevieve frowned in disgust. "Move. We're here to see a relative on the 35th floor. "I'm sorry, but who are you looking for on the 35th floor, and do you have an appointment?" the second guard asked, maintaining his blocking stance. "Do we have to report to you who we're looking for?" Genevieve yelled. "We're here to see our daughter-in-law, Mrs. Catherine Sterling. We're family. What need is there for an appointment?" Upon hearing the name Catherine Sterling and the apartment number, the two guards looked at each other, and the first said in an even firmer voice, "We're sorry, but we have received instructions from the owner of the apartment not to receive any guests who are not on the pre-approved list, and your names are not on that list. Please leave." "What? She dares to do something like this?" Genevieve raged. "Does she think she can order the guards here while living on loan in a friend's house? Do you know who I am? I'm her mother-in-law. Move aside right now." Blake, fearing his mother's outburst would make him lose face, quickly pulled her aside. Trying to be more polite, he took a business card from his wallet. "Hello, I'm Blake Caldwell, CEO of the Caldwell Group. I have a small misunderstanding with my wife. I would appreciate it if you could let us up for a moment to resolve a family matter." He thought his CEO title would intimidate these guards, but he was wrong. The guard glanced at the card, handed it back, and shook his head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell. We only follow the rules and the owner's instructions. Regardless of who you are, we cannot let you up. If you continue to cause a disturbance, we will be forced to take more drastic measures." The security team's inflexible and relentless attitude left Blake and his mother speechless. They were used to being respected and catered to wherever they went. This was the first time they had been so ruthlessly denied entry. They realized something was wrong. This penthouse was not just a friend's house, as they had thought. While they stood there, bewildered, furious, and unsure what to do, a very elegant man in a black suit came out of the lobby. It was the lawyer, Miles Ramsey. He had contacted me previously, and had been there for a while. "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell," Lawyer Ramsey began. His voice was calm, but with a hint of sarcasm he didn't hide. "You've come looking for Mrs. Sterling. Unfortunately, she's not here. You're that bitch Catherine's lawyer, aren't you?" Genevieve recognized the lawyer who had been to her house before to handle some of my paperwork. "Tell me, where is that bitch hiding? Are you also in on it with her to steal our family's assets?" Lawyer Ramsey simply smiled. "Ma'am, you should be more careful with your words. Slander is also a serious offense. I'm not conspiring with anyone. I am simply doing my job as instructed by my client and the true owner of this penthouse. Mrs. Catherine Sterling." "The owner?" Blake and Genevieve shouted in unison, unable to believe their ears. "This penthouse was hers?" "Exactly," Lawyer Ramsey nodded. "She bought it 3 years ago with her own personal funds. She just didn't tell anyone because she doesn't like to show off." "Oh, and it's not just this place," he continued conversationally. "I believe she also has a few more in Aspen and Palm Beach. I don't recall exactly." The lawyer's words were like successive hammer blows to the mother and son's heads. They were completely in shock. The daughter-in-law, the wife they had always scorned as a parasite, had silently amassed a huge personal fortune without them knowing. But what about the company? Why does she have the right to freeze the company's accounts?" Blake stammered. This was what terrified him the most. That. Lawyer Ramsey smiled enigmatically. "On that matter, you shouldn't ask me, but someone else. Someone you have probably forgotten for a long time." Just then, another man came out from behind the lawyer. A humble-looking man in worn clothes and a baseball cap in his hand. It was the old driver, Mr. Clark, who had served my father-in-law for decades. Seeing him, Blake and Genevieve were even more confused. "Mr. Clark, what are you doing here?" Mr. Clark didn't answer, just bowed his head and said in a trembling voice, "Young master, ma'am. The late chairman entrusted me with something. He told me that if a day like today ever came, I was to give this to you." As he finished speaking, Mr. Clark took a time-yellowed envelope from his pocket and respectfully handed it to Blake with trembling hands. The failed visit had opened the door to an even greater secret, to a truth that was about to be revealed from beyond the grave. The time-yellowed and worn envelope lay in Blake Caldwell's hands, but it felt as hot and heavy as a rock. He muttered to himself, unable to comprehend what was happening. His father had passed away almost 10 years ago, and all matters related to the will and inheritance had been settled long ago. Why was such a mysterious envelope suddenly appearing? Genevieve was also visibly bewildered. She stared at the envelope, then at the old driver, and an unnamed anxiety began to grow in her heart. "What's inside, Mr. Clark?" Blake asked in a slightly trembling voice. Mr. Clark simply shook his head. His old, wrinkled eyes filled with tears. "I don't know for sure, young master. The chairman only told me to keep it safe and to only bring it out on the day that you did a great wrong to Miss Catherine." The old driver's words were like a dagger stabbing Blake's conscience. His face turned pale, and with trembling hands, he slowly broke the old seal of the envelope. Inside was not a letter, but a stack of meticulously typed documents and a small USB drive. Blake took out the documents and began to read. As he read, his face turned from pale to a purplish hue. His hands trembled so much he could barely hold the papers. Genevieve, seeing this, grew impatient and snatched the documents to see for herself, and she too was petrified on the spot. It was a copy of the asset trust agreement that my father-in-law, Mr. Walter Caldwell, had drafted a month before his death. The agreement had been prepared by a prestigious international law firm. It bore the signatures of Mr. Caldwell, myself, and 2 witnesses, and was perfectly notarized. The contents of that agreement more accurately, that disguised will revealed a devastating, absolutely unbelievable truth. According to its terms, upon Mr. Caldwell's death, all of his shares in the company, representing 80% of the total value, would not be inherited by his wife, Genevieve, or his son, Blake Caldwell. Instead, they would be transferred in their entirety to a trust-based investment foundation headquartered in Switzerland. And the only person designated to manage that foundation, to receive the profits, and to exercise full power over all activities, investments, sales, withdrawals, was me, Catherine Sterling. The agreement also very clearly specified Blake Caldwell's role. He would be appointed to the position of CEO, acting as the representative face of the company, and would enjoy a very generous salary, bonuses, and benefits commensurate with his position as the CEO of a major corporation. However, he would have no ownership or decision-making power over key financial matters. All major decisions had to be approved by the trust manager, that is, by me. To put it bluntly, he was nothing more than a high-level employee working for his own family's company. Blake and his mother were completely stunned, speechless. They reread the agreement over and over, as if they couldn't believe their eyes. Why? Why had Mr. Caldwell done this? Why did he trust a new daughter-in-law more than his own son and wife? Just then, lawyer Miles Ramsey, who had been silently observing, spoke up. His voice was cold and clear. Perhaps if you see this, you will better understand Mr. Caldwell's reasons. He took the USB drive from Blake's hand, plugged it into a tablet he had brought with him, and turned the screen towards them. A video appeared on the screen. It was a recording from Mr. Caldwell's last days, filmed in his hospital room. He was sitting in bed, and although he looked gaunt and weak, his gaze was extremely lucid and penetrating. He was speaking, and the person sitting opposite him, listening intently, was me. Mr. Caldwell's voice resonated, weak but firm. I know I don't have much time left. I've spent my entire life building this business, and I can't let it sink like this. I know Blake's character well. He's a good kid, but he's not leadership material. He's too impulsive. He trusts people too easily. Leaving this whole group to him is like leaving the sheep in the care of a wolf. And my wife is a good woman, but she loves her son with a blind love and knows nothing about business. I've thought about it for many nights. He paused and coughed sharply. Then he looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a deep trust. Until you appeared, Catherine. With just a few conversations, I knew you had an extraordinary mind. You possess the sharpness, the determination, and the coldness necessary for a great entrepreneur. You are the one who can steer this ship to safe harbor and beyond. I know it's unfair to burden you with this great weight, but I have no other choice. Consider it a father's plea. Catherine, please, take care of this business for me, and take care of Blake for me. I trust you. The video ended, but Mr. Caldwell's last words continued to echo in the space. The truth had been revealed so clearly that it could no longer be denied. There was no conspiracy, no usurpation. Everything had been planned and delegated by the head of the family himself, the founder of the group. Blake and Genevieve slumped into the waiting chairs in the lobby, completely shattered. All their anger and accusations had become so stupid and ridiculous. They had been insulting and trying to harm the very benefactor who had silently supported this family for the last 10 years. They themselves had shattered the perfect play that Mr. Caldwell had created to protect their comfortable lives. I assume you understand everything now, don't you? Lawyer Ramsey said as he put away the tablet. Mrs. Sterling hasn't taken anything from anyone. On the contrary, she has faithfully fulfilled Mr. Caldwell's last wishes, working tirelessly to turn a company on the brink of bankruptcy into a $220 million empire so that you could live the life you have today. The order to freeze the accounts was not an act of revenge, but simply the exercise of her legitimate authority, her right as the owner to protect her assets from the risks you were causing. The truth had come to light, but instead of relief, it only brought greater desolation and despair. Blake and his mother realized they had not only lost the fortune, they had lost everything. They had lost the trust of their late father and husband, and they had lost the right to walk with their heads held high. After the devastating truth was revealed, Blake Caldwell and his mother didn't dare cause any more trouble in the building's lobby. They returned home in silence, consumed by absolute desolation and despair. The feeling of going from being the master and queen to realizing they were nothing more than employees, parasites, was more painful and humiliating than losing money. Back in the home they had been so eager to reclaim, mother and son had a huge fight. Genevieve blamed her son for being a fool and not knowing how to control his wife, while Blake blamed his mother for her greed, which had led things to this point. But after the mutual recriminations, they had to face the harsh reality: they were about to lose everything. If I, Catherine Sterling, really made a move, if I decided to withdraw all the capital from the group, that $220 million empire would collapse in an instant, and they would go from a life of luxury to having empty hands, and possibly even being in debt. Fear overcame pride. They knew they could no longer confront me legally. The only path left was to appeal to emotions. They decided to seek me out not to argue, but to beg. And to do so, they began to plot another play, a more elaborate and false one. A few days later, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Blake. His voice on the other end was no longer hostile or furious, but extremely weak and pitiful. Catherine, it's me. Could Could we meet for a moment? It's Mom. Mom is very ill. Sobs interrupted his words. I remained silent. I knew this was also a performance, but I was curious to see what role they would play this time. What's wrong? I asked coldly. Since she found out about everything, Mom has fallen apart. She's not eating. She just cries all day, calling for you and Dad. The doctor says the psychological shock was too great, and if she continues like this, it could be dangerous. Catherine, I know I was wrong. Mom was wrong too. But please, for the 10 years we spent together, could you come see Mom one last time? I'm begging you. She says she has something to tell you before she closes her eyes. The play of appealing to mother-in-law and daughter-in-law sentiment was staged very tragically. Although I knew it was a farce, I couldn't completely ignore it, and I wanted to see how far their shamelessness would go. I agreed. The meeting place was not a hospital, but the same mansion where we had lived together. They were probably trying to use the familiar space to evoke old memories. When I entered, the atmosphere of the house was completely different. There was no longer any jubilation or joy, only a gloomy and pitiful atmosphere. My ex-mother-in-law, Genevieve, was lying in the large bed in the master bedroom, looking extremely gaunt and pale. Her face, normally rosy and arrogant, was now pale and livid. She kept her eyes closed, and her breathing was shallow. Blake sat by her side, occasionally wiping her forehead with a cloth. A scene full of filial piety and sadness. Seeing me enter, Blake quickly stood up and motioned for me to be quiet. You're here. Mom just fell asleep. Sit here and wait a moment. He had me sit in a nearby chair and began his monologue. He spoke of his regret and his guilt. He said he was wrong to listen to his mother and betray me. He said that only in the days he had been without me had he realized how valuable I was. Catherine, I know it's too late to say anything, but I truly, truly regret it, he said, his eyes red. I don't expect you to forgive me. I only ask you to forgive my mother. She's old, and her judgment has become clouded. Everything she did was out of love for her son, out of a longing for a grandchild. Please, for the 10 years we've spent together, for the sake of my late father, save this family, save my father's life's work. Can you do that? Just then, Genevieve, who was in the bed, began to stir. She slowly opened her eyes and looked at me with clouded eyes. Catherine, is that you, daughter? She whispered. Her voice was as faint as a candle in the wind. She reached out a bony, pale hand towards me. Come here with Mom. I hesitated but eventually went over and sat on the edge of the bed. She took my hand, which was as cold as ice. Tears began to roll down her gaunt face. Catherine, Mom is sorry. I was wrong. I was a bad mother-in-law. I didn't treat you well. I was blind, I was greedy. Now I'm paying for it. Soon I will be reunited with your father-in-law. But before I go, I have one last wish, daughter. She struggled to sit up and looked at me with pleading eyes. Daughter, save our Blake. Save the family business. It's your father-in-law's life's work. You can't let it sink. She whispered. I'll do whatever you want. I only ask you not to withdraw the funds, not to abandon the company. Okay, daughter? A play performed to perfection. The tone, the gaze, every tear, it was all meticulously calculated. They no longer demanded or ordered. They were using sentiment, marital affection, and the memory of the deceased to tie me down, to appeal to my compassion. They thought that I, a sentimental woman, could never be heartless in the face of this scene. But once again, they underestimated me. I may be sentimental, but I am not a fool. And I knew very well that behind those tears hid an unchangeable calculation. I sat by my ex-mother-in-law's fake sickbed, my hand still held by hers. I listened to her pleas and laments, watching the tragic play mother and son were trying to perform to perfection, one as an elderly, dying mother filled with late regret. The other as a devoted son in deep sorrow. Everything she did was out of love for her son, out of a longing for a grandchild. But they were wrong. 10 years spent amidst their hypocrisy had taught me one thing: never believe the tears of the selfish. I looked at her face gaunt and pale from days of not eating or sleeping out of sheer panic, at the tears rolling down her cheeks, but I felt not a shred of compassion. I only found it ridiculous. I quietly withdrew my hand from hers. They used every possible means, sentiment, marital affection, even the memory of the deceased father, to create an invisible cage of guilt, to lock me in it and make me yield out of weakness of heart. Caldwell, I began. My voice was still calm, but cold and distant. There's no need to continue acting. I've grown tired of this play. My words were like a bucket of cold water on a play at its climax. Genevieve froze. Her sobs ceased. Blake stared at me with wide eyes, unable to believe I could be so callous. What are you saying? Genevieve stammered. You're saying I'm acting when I'm dying? Whether you're dying or not, I don't know, I said as I walked to the window. But if I hadn't frozen the assets, you'd probably be out enjoying a house hunt with your son and his mistress right now, wouldn't you? I turned and looked them straight in the eye. Do you think a few tears and a couple of apologies can erase the pain I've endured for 10 years? Do you think they can erase the betrayal and insults you've inflicted on me? Do you think I'm still the foolish Catherine from before, the one who softens with a few sweet words and is willing to sacrifice herself again? I laughed. A dry, sarcastic laugh. You're mistaken. That Catherine is dead. She died the day you, Mrs. Caldwell, clapped and celebrated when your son brought his mistress home. The person standing before you now is the chairwoman of the board of the Caldwell Group. And I didn't come here today to listen to your laments, but to talk business. The two words talk business that came from my mouth left mother and son stunned. They didn't understand what I meant. I didn't give them time to think. I walked over to the desk in the room and took out a stack of documents I had prepared beforehand. I placed it in front of Genevieve on the nightstand. This is my proposal. Blake rushed over to the documents and read them. As he read, his face changed color. It was not a reconciliation agreement, but a proposal to restructure the entire power of the group. According to this proposal, I said, my voice cold and firm like a businesswoman in the middle of a negotiation, I will not withdraw the funds from the group. I will continue to invest and might even inject more funds for business expansion. That will save the company from bankruptcy and you from ruin. Hearing this, Genevieve and Blake's faces relaxed slightly, and a glimmer of hope appeared in their eyes. But I cut that hope short. But, I emphasized, there are some conditions. First, you, Mrs. Caldwell, and Mr. Blake Caldwell, will transfer the remaining shares you hold in the subsidiaries, a total of 20% to me. Combined with the 80% I already manage, this means I will have 100% ownership of this group. What? Blake yelled. That's just stealing the company. Stealing? I raised an eyebrow. I'd call it reclaiming. I'm just taking back what was originally the fruit of my labor. But don't worry, I'm not that ruthless, I continued with the second condition. After I become chairwoman, I will reassign Mr. Blake Caldwell's position. He will no longer be CEO. He will be demoted to a position more in line with his actual abilities, deputy manager of the sales team. He will continue to come to work and receive a salary like a normal employee. Of course, there will be no more luxury car, no personal driver, no unlimited expense account. He will have to learn to live on his salary. And you, Mrs. Caldwell, I turned to her. You may continue to live in this mansion as the mother of a group employee. All living expenses and the maid's salary will continue to be covered by me. But the trips to Europe and luxury shopping sprees are over. You will have to learn to live a normal life like any other retiree. And the last and most important condition. I looked at both of them. From now on, you will not interfere in any way with the management of the group or my personal life. All decisions will be made by me alone. This was my proposal. It was a proposal that left them no other choice. Accept and live a normal life, though not as opulent as before, or refuse and face the collapse of the group, the loss of their assets, and starting from scratch. I wasn't sending them to jail or kicking them out onto the street, but I was taking away what they valued most. Power and a life of royalty. It was a punishment more painful than losing money. Genevieve and Blake sat there, stunned. Their tragic play had completely failed. Only now did they realize that the person before them was not the daughter-in-law or wife they could easily manipulate with emotions, but a cold, decisive woman with not the slightest tolerance, a true business shark, a chairwoman. After I presented my ice-cold proposal, Blake Caldwell and his mother were in a state of paralysis. They couldn't accept it, but they couldn't reject it either. They tried to plead again, appealing to old feelings, to loyalty, and even to Blake's deceased father, but I was no longer moved in the slightest. I gave them exactly 24 hours to think it over and sign the agreement. Otherwise, I would withdraw all the capital, just as I had promised. In the midst of this tense situation, another character who had been momentarily forgotten suddenly appeared to complicate things further. It was Brooke Ashton, Blake's pregnant mistress. When Blake's accounts were frozen and he couldn't buy the mansion, Brooke began to feel uneasy, but she hadn't given up completely. She believed that as long as she had the child in her womb, the treasure that could carry on the family line, she still held the upper hand. She thought that no matter how difficult the situation, the Caldwell family wouldn't dare mistreat their firstborn heir. She stayed in the luxury apartment Blake had arranged for her, waiting for good news from her lover. But when Blake arrived with a distraught face, and told her about my proposal that he would be demoted and the whole family could no longer live in opulence, Brooke couldn't stand by. Her dream of becoming a tycoon's wife was about to be shattered, and she decided to take matters into her own hands. She didn't come to me. She probably knew that confronting me directly at that moment was useless. She chose an easier target to attack. Her future mother-in-law, Genevieve. That day, while Genevieve was still in bed, agonizing over my decision, Brooke showed up uninvited. She no longer had the sweet and fawning demeanor of before. She walked straight into the bedroom and sat in a chair opposite Genevieve with a very defiant attitude. "Mrs. Caldwell," she got straight to the point. "I heard a rumor that Catherine has come back and wants to take over the entire family fortune. Is that true?" Genevieve sighed and nodded wearily. "Yes, that girl has everything in her hands now. My son and I can only hope for her mercy." "Mercy?" Brooke scoffed. "Do you think a woman who has been betrayed by her husband and kicked out by her mother-in-law will have mercy? You're too naive. She won't leave you or your son in peace. She'll torture you slowly, make you live a life worse than death to get her revenge." Brooke's words were like needles piercing Genevieve's fears. Then what do we do now?" she asked in a panicky voice. "What do we do?" Brooke smiled calculatingly. "Have you forgotten that you still have an ace up your sleeve? And that ace is right here, in my belly." She gently stroked her bulging stomach. "The firstborn of the Caldwell family. Catherine has money and power, but she can't have this. With this in our hands, we can still turn the tables." "What? What do you mean?" Genevieve still didn't understand. "I mean," Brooke leaned closer and whispered, "we can't let Catherine take everything. Blake can be demoted, but we can't let a stranger take the entire group's fortune. You have to fight. Demand that if she wants to keep the company, she must give up a considerable part of the fortune to secure your grandchild's future. I don't need much, just a mansion, a car, and a monthly allowance sufficient to raise a child like a prodigy. It's the child's legitimate right." She was inciting her mother-in-law to confront me to demand a share of the fortune. A farce of a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law united against the ex-wife was truly ridiculous. At first, Genevieve hesitated. She was too scared by my coldness and determination. But the thought of having to live a normal life, unable to show off or enjoy herself, and especially, thinking of her grandchild, greed resurfaced in her heart. And so, began an internal struggle between two women, the ex-daughter-in-law and the new one. Brooke kept coming to the house to cry and complain to Genevieve, painting a miserable future where her grandchild would suffer and not have what he deserved. She even hinted that she wasn't sure she could keep the child if the family didn't guarantee an opulent life for her and her son. A blatant threat. Blinded by Brooke's incitement and threats, Genevieve began to pressure Blake again. She cried, saying she couldn't let her grandchild lose out. She demanded Blake be firmer with me, to claim the rights of his own blood. Trapped in the middle, Blake was in an impossible situation. On one side was his powerful ex-wife, who controlled his financial life. On the other was his pregnant mistress and his greedy mother, who constantly pressured him. He was torn, not knowing what to do. The house where he had once been king had now become a battlefield of endless arguments and intrigues. I learned about everything through my loyal maids, but I just watched in silence. I wanted to see how far they would go in the chaos they had created themselves. And I wanted to see what choice the culprit of it all, my ex-husband, would make. Cornered on one side by my pressure and the threat of losing everything, and on the other by the blackmail and endless demands of his mistress Brooke, Blake Caldwell completely fell apart. He no longer had the spirit to work. He spent his days immersed in alcohol and endless arguments. Genevieve, pressured by me and in turn by her future daughter-in-law, entered a state of true madness. Greed, wounded vanity, and the fear of losing everything turned her into a cornered beast, willing to commit the craziest of follies to turn the situation around. After several days of deliberation, she decided to play her last card, the one she considered the most cunning and wicked. She would no longer confront me head-on with law or logic. She would use a much more formidable weapon. Public opinion. She wanted to turn me from a betrayed victim into an ungrateful daughter-in-law and cruel wife who had used schemes to seize her in-laws' fortune. She wanted to use social pressure and gossip to tarnish my reputation so I could never hold my head up again. Her plan was executed very methodically. She contacted several journalists specializing in celebrity gossip and lifestyle, writers willing to sell their pens for money. She fabricated an extremely tragic and moving story. In that story, she was the poor mother-in-law who had dedicated her entire life to her son and grandchild. Her son, Blake Caldwell, was a management genius who had built a huge business on his own. And I, Catherine Sterling, was a lucky girl from a humble background, rescued by her son's love. For the last 10 years, I had done nothing but live like a queen and enjoy myself. But when my husband succeeded, I was consumed by jealousy and didn't want him to have a child with another woman. And when I discovered that my late father-in-law, trusting me, had left me some control of the company, I immediately changed. I used conspiracies and schemes to seize the entire fortune. I kicked my husband and mother-in-law out of their own house and even turned my back on the unborn grandchild. A perfectly constructed story that played on the psychology of the masses, envy of the rich, compassion for the elderly and children, and prejudice against ambitious and cunning women. A few days later, numerous articles and fake news sites published the story in unison with very sensational headlines. The heartbreaking story of a tycoon's family fortune usurped, the tragedy of a young CEO, stripped of everything by his wife. After 10 years, a grandmother's tearful plea. I hope my daughter-in-law returns the fortune for my grandchild's sake. The articles immediately unleashed a storm on social media. My photos, Blake's, Genevieve's, and Brooke's, were spread uncontrollably. Thousands, tens of thousands of malicious comments and insults were directed at me. They called me a snake, ungrateful, a heartless woman. They didn't try to find out the truth, they just believed the tragic story Genevieve had painted. My reputation and honor, built over a lifetime, were being trampled and destroyed by them in a matter of days. Genevieve was very pleased with her move. She thought that I, a woman who valued her honor, could not withstand this pressure. She thought that fear would make me come to her to negotiate and accept her conditions. But she was wrong once again. She didn't understand that when a shark decides to go to sea, it does not fear the small waves. The public opinion attack on me was just a nuisance. It could not bring me down. I knew that the best way to deal with rumors is not to confront and deny them, but to crush them with a greater and more powerful truth. And I decided to show them and this whole society that truth. In the face of the media storm orchestrated by Blake Caldwell and his mother, I did not react for 3 days. I just watched in silence. My silence emboldened them even more and piqued the public's curiosity. They thought fear had left me speechless. They didn't know that my silence was the preparation for the final counterattack, the preparation for a devastating blow that would end it all. On the 4th day, when the story of the ungrateful daughter-in-law was at its peak of interest, my company, the Caldwell Group, issued a surprise press release. It announced an official press conference for the following morning with the theme, introducing the new chairwoman of the board of directors and clarifying internal group rumors. The announcement immediately caused a huge impact. A new chairwoman? Wasn't Blake Caldwell the CEO and top executive? Who would the new chairwoman be? And what were these rumors? All the media and public attention focused on this press conference. The next morning, the group's large auditorium was packed with journalists from all major media outlets. Blake Caldwell and his mother also attended. They were sitting in the front row, reserved for the family, with an expression of curiosity mixed with a little anxiety. They didn't understand what scheme I was hatching. At 9 a.m. sharp, the press conference began. The first to take the stage was not me, but the lawyer of the late Chairman Caldwell, my father-in-law. He was a veteran lawyer, highly respected in the legal world. He solemnly announced Chairman Caldwell's will and the asset trust agreement, revealing to the entire press the whole truth about the real ownership and control of the group. A murmur of astonishment swept through the entire auditorium. And when everyone was in shock from that truth, I appeared. I was no longer the housewife-looking Catherine Sterling. I wore a specially designed white power suit that radiated authority and elegance. My hair was pulled back in a high bun, showing an intelligent forehead, and my makeup was light but sharp. I walked with confidence, exuding the air of a true chairwoman. I stood at the podium, scanned the entire auditorium, and my gaze rested on Blake and his mother, who were sitting with faces pale as death. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began. My voice resonated clear and firm through the sound system. "I am Catherine Sterling, and as of today, I am the new chairwoman of the board of directors of the Caldwell Group." After the brief introduction, I didn't stop to argue about the rumors. I simply projected onto the large screen behind me all the irrefutable evidence. First, a video from security cameras showing Blake bringing his pregnant mistress home and the whole family clapping and celebrating. Then, audio recordings that vividly captured my mother-in-law insulting me and kicking me out of the house. And finally, copies of bank statements and receipts showing how my funds had sustained their standard of living for the past 10 years. The whole truth was exposed in the rawest and most undeniable way. The entire auditorium fell into a deathly silence. The only sound was the continuous clicking of camera flashes. Blake and Genevieve sat with their heads down, unable to look at anyone. They had completely lost their honor before the whole world. After presenting sufficient evidence, I ended my speech with a final statement. As for the future of the Caldwell Group, I am committed to continuing to lead the company and take it to a new level. As for Mr. Blake Caldwell, given the recent events, he is no longer fit to hold the position of CEO. The board will soon make an official decision on his new position. As for personal matters, I will make no further comments. I will let everything be resolved through legal channels. The press conference ended. I had achieved a total victory. All the rumors were shattered. My honor was restored, and the real power finally returned to its rightful owner. In the following days, Blake Caldwell and his mother completely disappeared from high society. They had to move out of the mansion and live a normal life. Blake was demoted to a rank-and-file position in an unimportant department. He had to go to work on his own and earn a living. Brooke, seeing that her lover had lost everything, quickly had an abortion and fled far away. And I officially took the reins of the group. With my talent and determination, I restructured the entire company, making it grow much stronger than before. I was no longer a shadow, but a true chairwoman, respected and admired by all. Sometimes, when I have free time, I still stand alone in my office on the top floor of the building, looking at the bright city lights. I no longer feel lonely. I have found peace in my independence and my strength. My story is perhaps not a love story, but the story of a woman's awakening, of her reclamation. A story that confirms that the greatest happiness comes not from a man, but from one's own courage and capability.